Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Also in Washington on Wednesday, the Senate voted for a resolution that would overturn changes to the District of Columbia Criminal Code passed by the City Council, including lowering some maximum penalties for crimes such as carjacking. This had already been passed by the House when President Biden announced that he would not veto it if it showed up on his desk. And that contributed to a remarkable vote in the Senate of 81 to 14 to not let the D.C. Criminal Code changes take effect. 33 Democrats voting with the Republicans, one Democrat voting present, which is always an odd choice. That was Raphael Warnock of Georgia. Kate, I wonder what you make of this. This looks to me like maybe the Republican Party's first win of this Congress, and a real goof up by the White House in not signaling to its Democratic allies earlier that President Biden was prepared to sign this bill.
Yeah, Kyle. First of all, I think the recent data is that D.C. has had 40 homicides this year, and that's a large increase over 2022, and that the district is on track for a third year with more than 200 killings. And before 2021, the last time that happened was 2003. Some of these details are in the post. So there is clearly a crime issue in Washington. And I think that senators have begun to notice it as well. And it's become politically very hard to ignore. So I do think this was an opportunity for Republicans, and we can talk about the politics a little bit later, but they haven't really been able to articulate or focus on this win, even though they got the president of the United States to make a turn and decide to sign it, even though the mayor of D.C. is no doubt really unhappy about that. This is a core issue that normal voters really care about. So hopefully Republicans can explain to voters what they did here and why it matters.
Colin, one of the things that I've been wondering is, I believe President Biden came out and said that he would not veto the bill, even though he had previously said he opposed it after the loss in Chicago of Mayor Lori Lightfoot. And I'm curious, obviously there's no way to know, but how much that influenced the thinking inside the White House. We've discussed on previous podcasts that the crime issue, I think, has real salience to voters. And many Democrats, I think, have been slow to realize that. And maybe this is the dawning of that realization in the White House after the loss of Lori Lightfoot, looking at this criminal code and President Biden thinking, do I really want to run for re-election in 2024, being attacked as the guy who lowered penalties for carjacking in the District of Columbia?
For sure. I mean, I wouldn't underestimate that. I think voters have been sending a message, and I'm glad that message is getting received. The line here after this bill and Biden's statement is that Democrats have been somehow bending to Republican pressure to be tough on crime. And that's why President Biden has reversed course and said he'd sign the bill when he originally said he'd oppose it. But honestly, I think it's Democrats probably bowing appropriately to the will of voters and maybe finally waking up and at least trying to pay attention or realizing how loaded this issue is, because voters are very clearly concerned about crime and they're feeling insecure in the cross currents of various movements that have cast a lot of doubt on the police and on the safety of their cities. So yeah, I mean, the Senate voted 81 to 14, as you said. That's super bipartisan, which is great, by the way. I think we should be celebrating that. Hallelujah. Not every single issue has to be some kind of crazy partisan cage match. And we've talked about this in other contexts, Kyle, about the fact that certain progressive positions, especially on crime and sentencing, are essentially ideological luxuries. And right now, I think Democrats are realizing that they just can't really afford them anymore. So I think that's what accounts for the changing positions here.
On the political point, though, in the House, the vote before President Biden again said that he would sign this bill. There were only 31 Democrats who voted to block the changes to the D.C. Criminal Code. So most of them voted against. And that, I think, is something many voters will be hearing more about if they live in a district where their Democratic congressman was one of those voting with the Democratic whole. The National Republican Campaign Committee, this is the House operation to elect Republicans, has already cut some campaign ads on this. Listen to this.
Murderers given reduced sentences. Carjackers given slaps on the wrist by pandering politicians. Not just the D.C. City Council. 173 House Democrats voted to support reduced sentences for violent crimes. So crazy, even President Biden won't support the anarchy. What's next? Defund the police?
Who knows how effective those ads and attacks will be going into 2024. But Kate, I guess that is the price of President Biden not having his strategy together, is letting those 173 Democrats get out on a limb before the president saws off the limb.
Yeah, Kyle, I mean, as politics go, that is pretty much malpractice to set the House Democrats up for this. I think directly seen in that ad you just described is Abigail Spanberger from the Richmond suburbs in Virginia, someone that the Republicans really wanted to unseat in the last cycle and failed to beat. So you will see them use this line of attack against vulnerable members. And I think to your point about Raphael Warnock voting present is almost a admission that he's really not sure which side of this he wants to come down on and wants to leave his options open and doesn't want to have to defend a no vote. So I think this really is a potent political issue and will be again, because this crime wave is not limited to DC. When Mitch McConnell was talking about this bill on the floor a couple days ago, he was describing the violent crime wave that's come to Louisville. So I think Americans all over the country understand the problem that violent crime has become. It's not limited to DC, but as McConnell said, you know, we are a world superpower and this is our capital. And so the functioning of the city matters. So I think they've struck on a potent political theme. Whether they can continue to drive that message, I'm not so sure.
Keep an eye out, meanwhile, in coming days for a second resolution along similar lines. The District of Columbia Council also voted for a bill that would let non-citizens vote in local elections. It would apply to about an estimated 50,000 non-citizens, compared with a resident population in the district of about 700,000. So that would be a significant addition to the electorate. There's also been a resolution in the House to overturn that. That has already passed. 42 Democrats joined that one. So more Democrats voted for that resolution than for the criminal code resolution, at least in the House. But Colin, the trick here is that I'm told that because this does not have anything to do with the criminal code, there's some slightly different rules that apply in the Senate. And this resolution on the non-citizen voting is not privileged in exactly the same way. And so what's likely to happen here is that a Republican will come to the floor and bring that resolution up for unanimous consent in the Senate, and it will probably be blocked by a Democrat and then perhaps bottled up in committee. But I think that Republicans would have a real good issue if they wanted to go to the public and say, here's another thing that the District of Columbia City Council has done, and we really want to overturn it. We had 42 Democrats in the House that joined us, and Chuck Schumer won't let this out of committee. And I think that's a potent issue along similar lines. I don't know if you would get 81 Democrats in the Senate if that came up to a vote, but I think you would certainly get more than 50.
Right. I think clearly, politically, Democrats have to think that they don't want to have to hand Republicans nationwide a huge cudgel to use against them, whether it's being soft on crime or allowing 50,000 non-citizens to vote. That's just, it's like a birthday present. And also, Kyle, let's be honest, just to loop back on the crime issue, lawmakers have to live in Washington too, you know, and at least spend a lot of time there, even if they're not living there full time. But they're people too, and they're going to feel the same things walking down the street that anyone in Washington is going to feel. And it's a little dicey now. And you want to keep in mind that you're not walking through too many shadowy corners and you're keeping your eyes out and eyes open. And so I think they can relate to those issues the same way that voters relate to those issues, whether the voters are living in Washington or Chicago or somewhere far away from there. These are going to be big issues in the upcoming elections.
Thank you, Colin and Kate. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we will be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.